This is a video about understanding your player characters. This is not a video about understanding your players. I've already made one of those, you can check that out here. And I might talk about that more in the future. But one of the things that I want to do in a future video is show you how you can create a campaign around your player characters. Especially since on this channel we are going to highlight some streamed games like Critical Role or Dimension 20, where character backstories and story arcs are very important to the campaign. But in order to do this, you need to be on the same page as your players. A lot of DMs, and for a long time I was one of them, thought that just having the basic details of the character was enough information. This is Dut the Faithful. He is an elderly brass dragonborn cleric of knowledge with the acolyte background. And if that's all you need to run a game that's fun for your players, then go with God. In other words, if you're that guy who tweeted that the player that gave you a multiple page complex character backstory would be the first person in your campaign to get killed off, and everyone else in your group is okay with that, and that's the kind of game that you all enjoy, this video is not for you. But I have found that a story can have a lot more impact if it is tailored to highlight the strengths and weaknesses of your player characters. And that's not just true about powers and mechanics, although that is also very true. Check out the Ginny D video about the shoot your monks principle of highlighting the cool abilities of your PCs. But it's also true of your player's vision for who their character is. I've been in situations where a problem arose at the table because some players didn't feel engaged in the story. And in part, that was because I didn't do a good job communicating with them and understanding something that they thought was obvious about their character. Now, there are a bunch of different ways to do this, and I'm sure there are other techniques that I have not thought of. So be sure to look down in the comments below for other options that are not in this video. Also, each one of these techniques will not be right for every player. Each player has a different approach to their character. So for some players, none of these techniques will work because they don't apply to them at all. And some of these can be deployed at different points during the campaign to keep you and your fellow players all on the same page. This is probably the easiest one to implement because there are already rules and charts and resources to help players flesh out their characters' backstories. The backgrounds in the player's handbook do a pretty solid job of getting players started. But there are also a bunch of charts in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. You can answer questions about your family, your upbringing, and your training to figure out how your character got to this point in their life. Now, the thing about backstories is that they are kind of the player's equivalent to the DM's world building. You could spend a lot of time on them. You could spend an endless amount of time on them. And you could end up adding details that ultimately are not ever going to matter during the game. A few months ago, I got a comment on this channel of a player who was joining a new campaign and wondering how much information they should put into their backstory. They want to be a good player, but they don't want to overwhelm the DM or add too much if the DM already has a plan in place. And I suggested that they should talk to their dungeon master about this. People who aren't yet sure what their dungeon master is looking for in their character backstories, if the DM is even looking for anything, should ask how much information is too much. Ideally, before they spend their entire weekend writing up their character's family tree, before their dungeon master says, "Oh, I already know what you are all doing, I don't need any of this." We'll do videos in the future about how specifically to integrate backstories into your overall campaign. But the basics are that the player gives you their backstory, their character's backstory, and then you turn all of the interesting non-player characters, locations, and events into fodder for your story. But that's not the only way to understand your characters. This is a question that I like to ask before the campaign even begins, or at least very early in the campaign, because it helps me create stories and scenarios and encounters that play into the player's idea of who their character is. I will ask something like this. If we made a movie trailer for this campaign and every character only appeared for one shot, what would they be doing? What is the one thing we could see that would sell us all on the core idea of this character? If there was a movie poster, what would they be doing on it? Not every player approaches their character this way, so it doesn't work for everyone. But I find that the answers can be really illuminating. If your fighter says, "I picture him cutting through hordes of enemies," or instead they say, "I picture him fighting one-on-one with a powerful enemy," then you have a lot of information about what kind of combat that player would like to see more of. If your wizard says, "I picture them with magic crackling between their hands, about to attack," that's very different from, "I picture her hunched over a dusty tome, taking notes." And there's one more question you could ask, one more technique you could use that could be applied before the first session. 5th edition backstories include charts where you can choose or randomly roll to decide on your character's personality traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. And sometimes these will tell you everything you need to know about a character. But it never hurts to follow up and just ask, point blank, what does your character want? This is really useful to ask early on, before your first session, because it helps you craft the beginning of your campaign. You might decide that the characters all meet in the first session, or that they already know each other. But knowing what each character wants can help you craft a scenario where everyone has a reason to want to work together. If your wizard wants to be famous no matter what, then you know you should probably put quests in front of them that give them the opportunity to gain notoriety, because that will get your wizard invested in them. I've seen so many groups, including my own, get bogged down in drama because nobody thought to ask what each character wanted. Now, some of this is the player's responsibilities as well. After all, we've all probably heard the ever-popular defense, "It's what my character would do," often to excuse the creation of a character who doesn't play well with others in a collaborative group game. But even if that's not the case, it can be really helpful to you as a DM to know what each character wants, or thinks they want, so you can keep them invested. Now let's look at that wizard again. He wants to be famous no matter what. My instinct on hearing that as a GM would be to craft a story where that hubris is tested and unlearned. Maybe they encounter other famous adventurers who turn out to be jerks or villains. Or they find themselves in a situation where they have the chance to be heroic, but nobody else will ever learn about it. But before I go down that road, I should ask the player what they want. Because it's possible that they'll say, I want to play somebody who wants fame because I want to see what they're going to do to get it. Then you know you can put missions in front of them that can give them the opportunity to gain fame and renown, but they involve moral complexity or difficult choices. And you can be reasonably sure at that point that the player will respond well to them. Even if they don't take on every quest, they'll still be exploring something that they wanted when they created the character. But you might instead learn that the player wants to play out the fantasy of gaining power and esteem in a magical world. They like video games where you can gain esteem and notoriety, but they want to experience that in a game with their friends like D&D, and in a world that can evolve and change over time, especially through multiple campaigns in the same world. And if that's the case, then I don't think teaching the character a lesson about hubris is a good idea, because that's not the experience the player is looking for. You still want to craft a story that can test them, but you can do that by putting challenges in their path, preventing them from achieving what they expected right away. It doesn't mean it can't still be part of the story, especially if it happens naturally. But if you go into that campaign with an intent to humble that character, and the player has already told you that that is not what they want, you could be heading toward a collision of character interpretations. As you investigate the monolith, you remember something you once heard about the War of the Blood Apes. Hey, can we ask about the cloak? Because these days, every time you move, it crinkles. Well, that's how I keep track of my setting. See? All of my maps, NPCs, family trees, monster stats, magic items, they're all right here. You know, you could do all of that through World Anvil instead. It's an online resource that lets you keep track of everything digitally. You can nest your maps, you can write articles, and you can invite your players to join your page. But see, World Anvil doesn't have the ability to keep track of a bunch of different timelines at once and link them to a map. Actually, World Anvil just released their new Chronicles feature. You can upload a map and connect it to a timeline and have multiple different maps and multiple different timelines. So if you're doing a campaign that has parallel universes or alternate histories, or even if you just have an NPC who's doing their own thing and you want to keep their plans and their activities secret from the rest of us on a different timeline, World Anvil can handle all of that. You could get a basic account for free. Or if you want to use the promo code SUPERGEEK, you could get 40% off of any annual membership. So, I didn't need to do any of this? No, that's such a waste of paper. Visit worldanvil.com and use the promo code SUPERGEEK to get 40% off of any annual membership. This is a question you can ask partway through the campaign, maybe even more than once, to get a read on how everyone is feeling. And now we're getting into the really heady Screenwriting 101 territory. Screenplays have 3 acts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in a recent campaign, when I realized we had some friction between 2 of the characters, I asked this question. Where does your character feel like they are on their journey? Do you feel like they're still in the first act, or have they transitioned into the second act? In my mind, we had shifted into Act 2 of the story, where we understood the premise and we knew what was going to drive a lot of the upcoming events of the campaign. Or at the very least, we had started dealing with story threads that tied into the backstories of a couple of the main characters. But really, only half of my players had made the logic leap that we were in the second act of the campaign. They still thought we were in the introduction, when the players have a chance to feel out their characters a little bit more. From their perspective, we had not hit the inciting incident that locked them into the campaign. And because of that, it informed the decisions that they were making in the games, because they still kind of felt like passengers. Because they didn't feel like their characters had been pushed into the second act yet, which is to say they didn't feel like they'd passed the threshold and they could not go back to their old lives anymore, they were all acting in their own interests and not the interest of the group or the story. Now again, this question of where a character is on their arc is not something that everybody can answer. Not everybody thinks of their characters as having a formulaic journey like this. And if you're using milestone leveling instead of XP, it might be difficult for them to know where they actually are on their journey because they have less of a chance to see it playing out in action. They don't have any control or necessarily any clues on when they're going to level up. They just have to keep doing whatever they think they're supposed to do until you're satisfied as the dungeon master. So that can be another source of them not feeling like they're in the second act yet. But if you ask your players, does your character feel like they know what they need to do? Not do they know what I want them to do, but do they feel like they have a concrete objective now? Does it feel like they have a direction to go in this campaign? You're essentially asking them, do they feel like they're still in Act 1 where things are more uncertain? Or do they feel like they've crossed into Act 2 where they at least have a little bit more of a sense of what's ahead of them, and in some small part maybe have a better idea of what the next several levels will look like? Now again, this depends a lot on your campaign and your style. And I know we're not on this episode of Critical Role yet in my Critical Role Demystified series, but if you look at this moment...
I don't always know why we're doing the things we do. It was fun breaking into that house. I'm good at it.
Yes, you are.
I don't know why we did it. I don't know why we're doing it. I don't know why we're with most of these people. And I love these people, but I don't know why we're doing it.
Well, okay, not every player is going to spell it out so explicitly as that. But if you're telling a narrative-driven campaign and some of your players seem frustrated, this might be a way to help diagnose why. And then you know you'll need to light a fire under those characters to get them on board with the next arc of your story. Now again, this is a technique I've used in one of my games, but only once. But I found that it helped a lot, especially from the DM planning perspective. And it was a new way to understand the characters in my campaign. And I'm probably going to do this after the next session in my Curse of Strahd game to help understand where each player feels like they are in their character's individual journeys. Speaking of screenwriting techniques, it's possible your player understands that what their character wants is not necessarily the same thing as what their character needs. Now, this is something you might not want to get into too deeply with your player. After all, you don't want to spoil the ideas you have for your story. But it can be helpful to ask the player what they think their character needs, and if they think that's different from what their character wants. For example, the monk in your party might want to end a family feud. But if you ask your player what their monk needs, it's possible that they'll say that the monk's family is probably no good for them, but it's all that the monk knows. And she's going to try to keep repairing it until she has a better example of a more functioning family unit. Because that's the only way she'll realize whether or not it's a lost cause to keep trying to repair their family. And no, again, not everyone is going to spell it out like that. This might take a bit of back and forth, and it might take asking a few leading questions. And I found that most players who are able to articulate this or even answer this question at all, well, they're either writers or they are also dungeon masters. Because either way, if they've crafted a story or developed a campaign of their own, then they might be thinking of their character story in these terms. But I can't guarantee that. In fact, it's pretty rare that a player will be able to articulate something this clearly. But this is still a technique that you can consider. And something that will play a big role when I make the video about creating campaigns based on your characters' backstories and emotional arcs. Now we are in full Screenwriting 201 mode. Not a lot of people do this when they're playing D&D. I've written novels and I didn't even do this for those characters. But I did have a player once who specifically described their character as having a lie that the character believed. It's a screenwriting term and it ties a lot into what we just talked about. In this technique, the character does not just have a want that is different from their need, although that is still part of it. But specifically, the character has a want that is based off of something that they are wrong about. Now, what I don't mean is your rogue wants revenge on their uncle's killer, but then they find out later that someone completely different actually killed their uncle. Because that's not satisfying.
We have some new information. This is your uncle's actual killer. We lost his trail 2 days ago.
This man killed my uncle, and he's still out there!
It really isn't satisfying. But a better example is the good version of the sullen loner in D&D. The lie they believe is that they can't trust anybody because they've been betrayed too many times. But over the course of the campaign, you put them into positions where they are encouraged to trust their allies. And when they do, if they do, they'll be broken of the lie that they believed. Like I said, this approach is pretty rare in D&D, which is why I saved it for last. But if this video happens to inspire a productive conversation with your players, then I've done my job. Now, I already know I'm going to get a bunch of comments about how ridiculous it is to have these conversations with your players. And if you're running a campaign that is based more on things you already decided or pre-written adventures, rather than what your characters decide or something based on their backstories, then yeah, that might very well be true. But if you happen to be like me and you like campaigns that dive into rich role-playing scenarios, then I suggest you try asking your players a few of these questions. Now, I'm not saying you need to tip your hand and tell your players where the story is going or what you're going to do. But communicating with your players and finding out what they want from the experience, well, that can really help you provide the perfect campaign for them. And ultimately, that's more important than whatever story I might want to tell on my own. At least, that's what I think. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you again to World Anvil for their sponsorship. If you want to support the channel, there are 4 ways you can do that. You can subscribe and hit the bell so YouTube knows that you like the channel, and so you get videos as soon as they come out, which, by the way, is every Monday and Thursday. You can join my Patreon. Any dollar amount helps the channel, but for $3 a month, you get to join my monthly live streams with patrons, you get access to new videos early, and you get content for your D&D games. This month's content is about 7 evil artifacts that you can use in your campaign. And boy, I think some of these things are pretty nasty, but also pretty fun to give a player. But I'm biased, I wrote them, let me know what you think. The 3rd way you can support the channel is by joining the Discord. We have a bunch of awesome people there talking about D&D and giving each other advice and putting together games. And finally, you can subscribe to my newsletter where you will occasionally get updates about things I've got going on. Until next time, play fair and have fun.